Sometimes the loneliest moments in life come when you're surrounded by everything you once built, yet feel completely forgotten. Daniel Moss knew that feeling well. At 52, his kids rarely called, his marriage was long over, and his days passed in silence on a quiet rural property. Then one afternoon, he found a bobcat kitten on a back road, carrying a small white bag in its mouth. Inside was a small worn notebook, a tiny collar, and a feeding syringe. The notebook belonged to a wildlife rehabilitator who had died the year before. The final page simply said, "If you find this, they still need someone." What Daniel discovered in those pages would change everything. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel crunched under Daniel Moss's boots as he stepped out of his truck, another bag of screws and hinges from the hardware store rattling in the passenger seat. 3 years in this place, and he still hadn't fixed half the things that needed fixing. The farmhouse sagged slightly to the left, its white paint peeling in long strips that curled away from the wood like dried skin. The garden his ex-wife had once tended was now a tangle of weeds and volunteer saplings. The workshop out back, the one he'd told himself he'd use for woodworking, for projects, for something, remained mostly empty except for his father's old tools gathering dust on the walls. Daniel was 52, but some mornings he felt 70. Other mornings he felt nothing at all. The divorce had been civilized, which somehow made it worse. No screaming, no thrown dishes, just Margaret's quiet voice across their kitchen table saying she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't watch him disappear into himself, year after year. Their kids were grown by then. Chloe, 23, and Preston, 25, old enough that they didn't have to choose sides. Old enough that they just drifted, the way grown children do when there's no center holding the family together anymore. He spoke to Chloe maybe once a month. Preston even less. The property sat 12 miles outside of Maplewood, Oregon, tucked into the foothills, where Douglas firs crowded against the sky, and the nearest neighbor was a 15-minute drive. Daniel had bought it thinking solitude would be healing, that silence would be peaceful. He'd been wrong about the difference between peace and emptiness. But by the time he understood that, the house was his, and Margaret was gone, and starting over seemed more exhausting than just staying put. His days followed a rhythm worn smooth by repetition. Coffee at dawn, standing at the kitchen window, watching deer move through the trees. A few hours of half-hearted work on whatever part of the house seemed most urgent. Lunch alone at the kitchen table, usually something microwaved. Afternoons spent running errands in town or walking the property lines, checking fence posts that didn't really need checking. Dinner, television, bed. Repeat. He told himself it was enough, that he'd earned the right to just exist quietly after 30 years of insurance adjustments and mortgage payments and being responsible. But the truth sat heavier in his chest with each passing month. This wasn't living. This was waiting. For what? He couldn't say. The afternoon of the discovery started like any other. Daniel had driven into Maplewood for supplies, nodded at the hardware store clerk who knew his face, but not his name, and headed home on the winding county road that cut through dense forest. The October light slanted golden through the trees, that particular autumn richness that made everything look painted. He almost didn't see her, a flash of tawny fur at the roadside, too small to be a deer. Daniel slowed, then stopped completely, putting the truck in park. 30 feet ahead, a bobcat kitten sat in the gravel, no more than 4 months old. She had something in her mouth, a small white bag of some kind, canvas or heavy fabric. The kitten pulled at it, shaking her head like a dog with a toy, but the bag seemed stuck on something. Daniel killed the engine and sat very still. He'd seen bobcats before, distant shapes disappearing into brush, but never this close. Never one this young, and certainly never one that didn't immediately bolt at the sight of a human. The kitten looked up at the truck, ear tufts prominent on her small head, and made a sound. Not quite a meow, more like a chirp of frustration. She went back to worrying the bag. Daniel opened his door slowly. The kitten watched him but didn't run. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Easy now." He approached at an angle, not directly, the way he'd once seen a wildlife documentary suggest. The kitten tensed but held her ground, the white bag still clamped in her jaws. Up close, Daniel could see she was thin, ribs visible through her spotted coat, eyes too large for her face. "You're pretty hungry, aren't you?" The kitten made that chirping sound again. Daniel crouched down, making himself smaller. "What have you got there?" He reached out slowly. The kitten pulled back but didn't bolt. He got his fingers on the bag's fabric and gently tugged. The kitten released it, sitting back on her haunches, watching him with those oversized golden eyes. The bag was heavier than he expected. Something solid inside. Daniel stood carefully, and the kitten stood too, tracking his movements. He walked back to his truck, half expecting her to vanish into the forest. Instead, she followed at a distance of about 10 feet, curious and utterly unafraid. Daniel sat on his truck's tailgate and opened the bag. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were 3 items: a small leather collar sized for a young animal, an empty feeding syringe of the type used for medicine or formula, and a small notebook bound in worn brown leather. The notebook's cover was soft from handling, its corners rounded with age. Daniel opened it. The first page bore a name in careful handwriting, Iris Whitmore, and below that, Wildlife Rehabilitation Log, 2003-2024. His hand stilled. He turned pages slowly. Each entry was dated, written in the same neat hand. March 15th, 2003. Red-tailed hawk, juvenile, wing fracture. April 2nd, 2003. Raccoon, 3 months, orphaned. The entries went on, year after year, dozens of animals, hundreds maybe, each one documented with the date it arrived, its condition, the care it received, and eventually the date and location of its release back into the wild. The entries weren't just clinical notes. Iris Whitmore had written about the animals like they were individuals. The raccoon is stubborn about the formula, but finally accepted it from the bottle at midnight. She has her mother's clever hands. The hawk watched me today, with something like trust. I think he knows I mean to help. Daniel flipped forward through the years, watching Iris's life unfold in careful observations and small triumphs. She wrote about her husband, Jack, who built her enclosures and helped with releases. Then, around 2018, Jack's name stopped appearing. A single entry from November of that year. Jack passed this morning. The animals don't know how to comfort me, but they keep me getting up anyway. The later entries took on a different tone, more reflective, more aware of time passing. Iris wrote about aging, about her hands getting stiff, about wondering how much longer she could do this work. But the care she documented never wavered. Daniel reached the final pages. The last entry was dated October 2024, just 1 year ago. Bobcat kitten, female, approximately 3 months. Mother struck by vehicle on Timber Road. This one will be my last. I can feel it. She's healthy, strong-willed. I've named her Scout. If she survives and you're reading this, she brought you here. That means you were meant to find this. They still need someone. Daniel sat very still on the tailgate, the notebook open in his lap. He looked up. The bobcat kitten, Scout, sat watching him from the roadside, her head tilted slightly, as if waiting for him to understand something. The white bag had been deliberate. The notebook inside had been left for someone to find. Iris Whitmore had known she was dying, had known Scout might survive her, and had created this improbable message in a bottle. The last page of the notebook held one more line in Iris's hand. If you find this, they still need someone. Daniel looked at Scout. Scout looked back. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, the October air cooling fast. He should call wildlife services. That was the responsible thing to do. Turn this over to professionals who knew what they were doing. But something in Iris's words held him. They still need someone. Not they need a professional. Not they need proper care. They need someone. He thought about his empty house, his string of identical days, the way time passed through him now without leaving any mark. He thought about Iris Whitmore, who had lost her husband and chosen to keep living by caring for creatures who couldn't care for themselves. "All right," Daniel said quietly. "All right." He walked slowly to his truck and opened the passenger door. He took the bag of screws and hinges and set it in the truck bed, then lined the passenger seat with an old blanket he kept for hauling supplies. "Come on, then," he said to Scout. The kitten chirped once, and impossibly jumped up into the truck. Daniel drove home slowly, this small, wild thing sitting on his passenger seat, and felt the first stirring of something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Daniel didn't sleep well that first night. He'd set Scout up in the workshop, using a large dog crate he found in the rafters, left over from when Margaret's sister had visited with her Labrador years ago. He'd lined it with old towels and filled a shallow dish with water. Scout had circled the space warily before finally settling in a corner, her eyes reflecting the single bulb he'd left burning. He checked on her 3 times before midnight, standing in the doorway of the workshop, watching her small shape rise and fall with breath. Each time she watched him back, silent and assessing. At dawn, Daniel made coffee and brought Iris's notebook to the kitchen table. The morning light came thin and grey through the windows as he read more carefully now, paying attention to details he'd skimmed the day before. Iris had been meticulous. Every animal entry included not just dates and conditions, but feeding schedules, behavioral observations, medical treatments. She noted which animals adapted quickly to captivity and which fought it. She wrote about the ones she lost. There weren't many, but she recorded each one with obvious grief. A young owl that never recovered from its injuries. A fox kit that succumbed to an infection despite antibiotics. She blamed herself in the margins, wondering what she'd missed, what she could have done differently. But most of her entries ended with release dates and locations, coordinates, sometimes, notes about the animal's readiness, its return to wildness. Those entries carried a different tone, satisfaction, even joy. Daniel turned to the section about Scout. Iris had found her in late July, the mother's body still warm on Timber Road. The kitten had been hiding in the brush nearby, too young to survive alone. Iris had documented every day of Scout's care, formula feedings every 4 hours at first, then transitioning to solid food, notes about Scout's play behavior, her growing hunting instincts, her comfort around humans. Then, abruptly, the entries became sparse. August passed with only 3 brief notes. September had 2. Iris's handwriting grew shakier. September 18th. Not feeling well. Scout is nearly ready. Need to prepare. September 28th. Made the bag. She'll find it. Someone will come. October 3rd. Last entry. 2. Tired now. Have faith. The notebook ended there. But when Daniel turned the final page, something slipped out and fell onto the table. A small index card, yellowed at the edges, with writing on both sides. Daniel picked it up, his chest tight. The front of the card read, "If you found Scout and this notebook, there's more you need to know." He flipped it over. "There's a red fox, Kit. I was caring for him when I got too sick. He was at my property, 12 miles east on Timber Road, then north on the unmarked logging road, 2.3 miles to the clearing. Small blue house, enclosure behind. I couldn't get back to him these past weeks. If he's still alive, he needs help. Please, they still need someone." Below the words was a hand-drawn map, simple but clear, roads marked, distances noted, the property outlined in careful ink. Daniel set the card down and stared at it. A fox, Kit. Alone for weeks, maybe months if Iris had died shortly after her last entry. The date suggested she'd passed in early October of last year. That made it 13 months ago. No animal could survive that long without care. Could it? He should call someone. Wildlife services, a rehabilitation center, someone qualified. He looked at Scout's entries again, at the detailed care schedules and medical notes. He knew nothing about any of this. He was an insurance adjuster, retired insurance adjuster. He processed claims and wrote reports and lived a quiet, careful life that never included wild animals or medical emergencies or any of this. But Iris's words echoed. They still need someone. Not someone qualified, just someone. Daniel thought of his father, who died when Daniel was 32. Lung cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to death. His father had been a carpenter, had taught Daniel to work with wood, to measure twice and cut once, to take pride in what you built with your hands. After the funeral, Daniel had boxed up his father's tools, brought them to whatever apartment he and Margaret were renting at the time, and never touched them again. When they'd bought their first house, the tools went into the garage, then the next garage. Now they hung on the workshop walls, gathering dust, while Daniel did nothing with his hands except sign paperwork and, these past 3 years, hold a remote control. Things left undone, words unsaid, time wasted. He looked at Scout through the kitchen window. She was awake in the workshop, visible through the open door, sitting at the front of the crate and watching the morning. Daniel made his decision. He spent an hour online, searching for information about bobcat care, fox care, wildlife rehabilitation basics. The information was overwhelming. Nutrition requirements, disease risks, legal considerations, enclosure specifications. He bookmarked a dozen sites and felt his confidence draining with each new page of warnings and complications. Then he found a forum post from someone who'd worked with a rehabilitator. The advice was simple. Start with the basics. Clean water, appropriate food, safe shelter, minimal stress. Wild animals are tougher than you think. If they've survived this long, they want to live. Your job is just to not get in the way of that. Daniel closed the laptop. He gathered supplies, work gloves, a flashlight, the carrier he'd used to transport his neighbor's cat to the vet once, years ago. He filled a cooler with ice packs and bottled water. He had no idea what he'd find at Iris's property, but he'd learned in 30 years of insurance work that preparation mattered. Scout watched from her crate as he loaded the truck. When he came back inside to check the map one more time, he found himself speaking to her. "I'm going to look for your friend, the fox she wrote about. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try." Scout made that small, chirping sound. Daniel grabbed Iris's notebook and the index card, then hesitated. He looked at Scout, really looked at her. This small, wild thing that shouldn't trust him, that had somehow carried a message from a dead woman to a man who'd forgotten how to live. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for finding me." The drive to Timber Road took 20 minutes. The unmarked logging road was easy to miss, just a gap in the trees with 2 dirt tracks disappearing into shadow. Daniel turned carefully, his truck bouncing over roots and rocks. The forest pressed close on both sides, dense enough to block most of the morning light. At 2.3 miles, exactly as Iris had marked, the road opened into a clearing. The blue house sat small and tilted, its paint faded to grey-blue, its windows boarded. The property had the look of a place returning to wilderness, grass waist-high, saplings pushing up through what had once been a garden, vine maple growing wild over a collapsed fence. Daniel parked and got out slowly. The silence was absolute, except for wind in the trees and the distant call of a crow. He walked around the house, following the overgrown path Iris must have taken hundreds of times. Behind the structure, exactly where the map indicated, stood a large enclosure, maybe 20 feet by 30, with walls of chain link and a roof of wire mesh to keep predators out. Inside, a small wooden shelter sat in one corner. The enclosure gate hung open, secured only by a loop of wire. Daniel's heart sank. If the gate was open, anything inside would have escaped months ago. But then he saw it, a small shape moving in the shadows of the shelter. Red fur, white-tipped tail, too small to be an adult fox. The kit was alive. Daniel stood frozen, hardly believing it. 13 months. How had it survived? Then he noticed details he'd missed at first glance. A plastic bowl near the shelter. It held water, relatively clean. Scattered nearby, the remnants of something that looked like dried dog food. And at the edge of the clearing, barely visible, fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone else had been coming here. Someone else knew about the fox kit, watched Daniel from the shadows of its shelter, eyes bright with fear and something else. Calculation, maybe. Survival instinct. Daniel remained motionless at the enclosure gate, hardly breathing, letting the animal assess him. It was smaller than he'd expected, though he had no real reference point. The kit's red coat was dull, ribs visible through its fur, but it was alert, its ears tracking every sound, its body coiled and ready to bolt despite having nowhere to go. "Easy," Daniel said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The fox didn't move. Daniel looked around the enclosure more carefully now. The wooden shelter was well built, professionally done, with a slanted roof to shed rain and ventilation holes near the roofline. Inside, he could see old blankets, chewed and nested. The water bowl was one of those heavy ceramic ones that couldn't be tipped easily, and the food scattered near it, definitely kibble of some kind, not fresh but not ancient either. Someone had been maintaining this. Recently, he heard it then, the sound of an engine approaching on the logging road. Daniel turned as a faded green pickup emerged from the trees and rolled to a stop beside his own truck. The driver's door opened, and an elderly man climbed out slowly, using the doorframe for support. He was perhaps late 70s, tall but stooped, wearing canvas work pants and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. His face was weathered into deep lines, his hair white and thinning. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "Who are you?" the man called out. "This is private property." Daniel raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "My name is Daniel Moss. I found something that belonged to Iris Whitmore. A notebook. It led me here." The old man's expression shifted. Surprise, then something softer. He walked closer, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints hurt. Iris's notebook? The one she kept for her animals? Yes, sir. She documented years of rehabilitation work. The last entry mentioned a fox kit that needed care. The man stopped at the enclosure gate, looking past Daniel at the small red shape in the shelter. His eyes grew distant. "That's Rusty," Named him myself. Iris asked me to check on him before she... He paused, cleared his throat. Before she passed. You've been feeding him, Daniel said. Keeping him alive. Once a week, sometimes twice. It's all I can manage at my age. Live over in Cedar Mills, about 40 minutes from here. I bring water, leave food. He won't let me near him, won't let anyone near him. Too wild now, I suppose. Or too scared? Daniel looked at the fox. Rusty, again. 13 months of minimal human contact. Just enough food and water to survive. It was a miracle the animal hadn't starved or been killed by a predator. I'm Gordon, the old man said. Gordon Whitmore. Iris was my younger sister. Daniel felt something settle in his chest. I'm sorry for your loss. Gordon nodded slowly. She was a force of nature, Iris was. Couldn't stop her from doing this work, even when her health started failing. She loved these animals more than most people love their own children. He looked at Daniel more carefully. How did you come by her notebook? Daniel told him about finding Scout on the road, the white bag, the deliberate way Iris had arranged everything. Gordon listened without interrupting, his expression moving through surprise and sadness and something like pride. That sounds like Iris, he said, when Daniel finished. Always planning, always thinking ahead. She knew she didn't have much time left. Asked me to look after any animals she left behind, but by the time I got here after her funeral, most had scattered. Just found Rusty. Figured keeping him fed was the least I could do. The Bobcat Kitten. Scout. She's at my place now, Daniel said. I set up a crate in my workshop, but I don't really know what I'm doing. I was hoping to find Rusty alive, bring him back, but... He gestured helplessly at the enclosure. Gordon studied him. You're not a rehabilitator. No, sir. I'm just someone who found a notebook and couldn't walk away. Something in Gordon's face softened completely. Iris would have liked you. She believed the right people found their way to this work when they needed it most. He looked at Rusty again. That fox needs proper care, not just maintenance feeding. He needs socialization, medical attention, a real chance at release someday. Can't give him that myself. Too old, too far away. I want to try, Daniel said. I don't know anything about wildlife rehabilitation, but I'm willing to learn. Gordon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Let me show you something. He led Daniel to the blue house. The front door was unlocked. Who would steal from an abandoned property this deep in the woods? Inside, the air smelled of dust and neglect. Furniture sat covered in sheets. But Gordon moved through the house with familiarity, leading Daniel to a small room that had clearly been Iris's office. The walls were covered with charts and diagrams, feeding schedules for different species, growth development timelines, medical protocols. One entire wall held a massive topographical map of the region, covered in colored pins. This was her headquarters, Gordon said. Every animal she ever released, she tracked it here. The pins show release locations. She believed in giving them back their territory, understanding the ecosystem she was working within. Daniel stepped closer to the map. Dozens of pins, red, blue, green, yellow, each with a small tag attached. Dates, species, notes in Iris's handwriting. Gordon pointed to a shelf beneath the map. Her reference library. Books on wildlife biology, veterinary care, animal behavior, and here, he pulled out a plastic bin. Inside were laminated charts, the same ones Daniel had glimpsed on the enclosure wall through the open shelter door. Her feeding, schedules and care protocols. She made these so they'd last, so someone could use them even after she was gone. Daniel picked up one of the charts. It detailed feeding requirements for juvenile foxes, amounts, frequency, nutritional content. Another chart covered Bobcat development stages and hunting behavior milestones. She was preparing for this, Daniel said quietly. She knew someone would come. Iris believed in continuation, Gordon said. She used to say that good work never really ends. It just gets handed forward to the next person willing to do it. He looked at Daniel directly. Are you willing? Daniel thought about his empty house, his string of meaningless days, the way he'd been slowly disappearing into his own irrelevance. He thought about Iris Whitmore, who'd lost her husband and chosen to keep living by giving other creatures a chance at life. Yes, he said. I'm willing. Gordon smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Then let's get Rusty home. It took 2 hours and considerable patience. They used food to lure Rusty into a carrier, not the one Daniel had brought, which was too small, but a proper wildlife transport crate Gordon retrieved from his truck. Rusty fought at first, then seemed to give up, allowing himself to be contained. He's exhausted, Gordon said, as they loaded the carrier into Daniel's truck. Not just physically, emotionally. He's been alone too long. Scout chirped from her crate when Daniel opened the workshop door, Rusty's carrier in his arms. He set up a second enclosure on the opposite side of the space, using chicken wire and 2x4s he found in his materials pile. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. Rusty huddled in the back corner when Daniel released him, making himself as small as possible. It's all right, Daniel said softly. You're safe now. Gordon stood in the doorway watching. You've got a long road ahead. These animals need more than food and water. They need time, patience, understanding. I know, Daniel said, though he didn't. Not really. Gordon pulled a folded paper from his pocket. My phone number. Call me any time. I'll come help when I can. Teach you what Iris taught me. He paused. She'd be glad someone's continuing her work. After Gordon left, Daniel sat on an overturned bucket between the 2 enclosures. Scout watched him from one side, Rusty from the other. Neither animal relaxed, but neither looked away. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt needed. Daniel woke at 5 the next morning, to the sound of something tipping over in the workshop. He pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and hurried outside, the October air cold enough to make his breath visible. Scout had knocked her water bowl across the crate floor and was pawing at the wet towels with clear displeasure. Rusty remained motionless in his corner, only his eyes tracking Daniel's movements. All right, Daniel said. Message received. He cleaned Scout's crate first, replacing the soaked towels with fresh ones and refilling her water bowl. She watched the entire process with what looked like supervisory interest. When he moved to Rusty's enclosure, the fox pressed himself harder against the back wall, his breathing quick and shallow. I'm just going to slide this food in, Daniel said quietly, demonstrating with slow movements. See? Nothing scary. Rusty didn't respond, but his eyes followed the bowl of kibble that Daniel had soaked in warm water per one of Iris's charts. Gordon had explained that softer food was easier on animals under stress. Daniel spent the morning reading through Iris's notebooks and the library of books Gordon had loaded into his truck before leaving the previous evening. The information was overwhelming. Nutritional requirements, disease symptoms, behavioral indicators, legal regulations. Each species had its own needs, its own timeline for development and release. He made notes in a spiral notebook, trying to organize the information into something manageable. Feeding schedules, health checks, enrichment activities. The list grew longer with each page he read. Around noon, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. Dad? Chloe's voice, uncertain. Daniel's chest tightened. Hi, sweetheart. I was just calling to let you know I'll be in Oregon next month for work. Thought I might stop by if you're around. Of course, that would be wonderful. A pause. Are you okay? You sound different. Daniel looked at the two enclosures, at Scout grooming herself and Rusty still frozen in his corner. I'm all right. Actually, something interesting happened yesterday. Interesting how? He almost didn't tell her. Their conversations had been so surface level for so long. Weather, work, pleasantries that meant nothing. But something made him continue. I found a bobcat kitten on the road. She led me to some animals that need help. I'm taking care of them. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, you're taking care of wild animals? I know it sounds strange. Dad, you're an insurance adjuster. You don't know anything about wildlife. The observation stung because it was true. I'm learning. Another pause. Is this some kind of midlife crisis thing? Daniel felt his jaw tighten. No, Chloe. It's just something I'm doing. Okay. Her tone suggested it was anything but okay. Well, I'll let you know when I have exact dates for my visit. Please do. After they hung up, Daniel sat staring at his phone. His daughter thought he was having a crisis. Maybe he was. Maybe that's what this looked like from the outside. A lonely man filling empty space with a project that would inevitably fail. But when he looked at Scout, at the way she watched him with growing recognition, he didn't feel like he was failing. He felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. The afternoon brought another visitor. Daniel was attempting to clean Rusty's enclosure, a delicate operation that involved opening a small access door while the fox retreated to the furthest corner, when he heard a vehicle pull up. Gordon emerged from his truck carrying a large plastic storage bin. Thought you might need these. Inside the bin were supplies, bottles of electrolyte solution, packages of specialized kibble, a digital scale, medical gloves, and several syringes still in sterile packaging. This is too much, Daniel protested. It's what Iris had left. Better you use it than it sits in my garage. Gordon set the bin down and looked at the enclosures. How are they doing? Scout's adapting. Rusty hasn't moved since yesterday. Gordon nodded. That's normal. He's terrified. Give him time. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Brought you something else. Iris's release map. Thought you should have it. Daniel unfolded the map carefully. It was larger than he'd realized, covering nearly 3 square feet when fully opened. The colored pins marked locations across the entire region, releases spanning 2 decades of work. She tracked every single one, Daniel asked. Every one she could. Some animals you release and never see again. Others she'd spot signs of them. Tracks, scat, kill sites. She documented all of it. Gordon pointed to a cluster of green pins. These are bobcats. She released 7 over the years. Some of them established territories that overlapped with her property. She believed Scout's mother might have been one of hers, from way back. Daniel traced the pins with his finger, understanding the scope of what Iris had built. This wasn't just rehabilitation, it was ecosystem management, population tracking, a living map of wildlife recovery. I could never do this, he said quietly. Not right away, Gordon agreed. But you don't have to. Just focus on Scout and Rusty. The rest will come if it's meant to. They spent the afternoon together, Gordon teaching Daniel the proper way to approach the enclosures, how to read animal body language, how to adjust food portions based on behavior and energy level. He showed Daniel how to use the digital scale to track weight, a crucial indicator of health. Weigh them weekly, Gordon said. Write it down. Patterns matter more than individual numbers. By evening, Daniel had filled several pages of his notebook with instructions and observations. Gordon stayed for dinner, sandwiches at the kitchen table, simple but companionable. It was the first meal Daniel had shared with another person in his own home since the divorce. "My wife, Pauline, wants to meet you," Gordon said as he prepared to leave. She loved Iris dearly, helped with the animal care when Iris needed extra hands. She'd like to see the work continuing. "I'd like that," Daniel said, meaning it. After Gordon left, Daniel returned to the workshop. Scout was active now, pacing her enclosure with restless energy. Rusty remained still, but his eyes seemed more alert, tracking Scout's movements. Daniel pulled up one of Iris's charts about Bobcat development. Scout was around 5 months old now, approaching the age when wild juvenile bobcats would start learning to hunt. The chart recommended enrichment activities, hiding food, introducing varied textures, encouraging natural behaviors. He spent an hour creating simple enrichment items from materials around the workshop. A cardboard box with holes cut in it and kibble hidden inside. A log with food tucked into the bark. A rope toy that smelled like the woods. When he placed the box in Scout's enclosure, she approached immediately, sniffing and pawing at it. Within minutes, she'd figured out how to access the food inside. She looked almost pleased with herself. Daniel smiled, feeling a small surge of accomplishment. He checked on Rusty one last time before bed. The fox hadn't touched his food, but his water bowl was empty. Progress, maybe. Or just thirst. "Good night, Rusty," Daniel said softly. "Tomorrow will be better." As he walked back to the house, Daniel noticed the walking stick Gordon had left leaning against the workshop door earlier. He'd almost forgotten about it. He picked it up now, feeling the weight of it, examining the carvings in the dim porch light. Each animal represented a life saved, a release successful, a piece of Iris's legacy. Daniel carried the stick inside and leaned it beside the fireplace. Someday, maybe, he'd add his own carvings. But for now, just holding something Iris had created with her own hands felt like connection enough. He slept better that night than he had in months. The following Sunday, Daniel drove to Gordon and Pauline's home for dinner. The address led him to a small ranch house on the outskirts of Cedar Mills, its yard meticulously maintained, flower boxes still holding late-season chrysanthemums. Pauline Whitmore answered the door before Daniel could knock. A woman in her mid-70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She wore an apron covered in flower dust. "You must be Daniel. Gordon's told me all about you." She pulled him into a hug before he could respond, the gesture so natural and warm that he found himself hugging back. Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Family photos covered the walls. Children, grandchildren, and among them, several of a younger woman with dark hair and a kind face, always surrounded by animals. "That's Iris," Pauline said, following his gaze. "This one's from her 40th birthday. We threw her a party at the rehabilitation center she'd built by then. She was so happy that day." Daniel studied the photo. Iris held a young deer in her arms, both of them looking at the camera. The joy on her face was unmistakable. "She had a gift," Pauline continued, "not just with animals, but with understanding what people needed too. She would have liked you taking over her work." "I'm not taking over," Daniel said quickly. "I'm just helping with Scout and Rusty." Pauline smiled knowingly. "That's how it starts." Dinner was comfortable in a way Daniel hadn't experienced in years. Gordon and Pauline had been married for 52 years, and their ease with each other showed in small gestures. How Pauline passed Gordon the salt before he asked, how Gordon refilled her water glass without looking. They asked Daniel about his life, his family, and listened without judgment when he explained about the divorce and his distant children. Families are complicated, Pauline said gently. Sometimes they need space to find their way back to each other. After dinner, Gordon brought out the release map, spreading it across the cleared dining table. He explained Iris's color-coding system: green for bobcats, red for foxes, blue for raptors, yellow for small mammals. She believed in documentation, Gordon said. Not just for record-keeping, but because it helped her understand the bigger picture. Where animals thrived after release, where they struggled, what factors influenced success. Daniel leaned over the map, tracing the patterns Gordon described. Several release sites clustered around water sources, others near old-growth forest. The map told a story of ecosystem health, of habitat quality, of wildlife corridors that connected different territories. Scout's mother was likely here, Gordon said, pointing to a spot marked with a green pin dated 15 years earlier. Iris released a young female bobcat in this area. The territory would have passed to her offspring eventually. So Scout might literally be Iris's legacy, Daniel said quietly. In more ways than one. Gordon folded the map carefully. Iris used to say that every animal we help creates ripples, not just in its own life, but in the lives of its offspring, its prey, its predators. We think we're saving one creature, but we're really supporting an entire web of connections. The conversation turned to practical matters. Gordon suggested Daniel consider becoming a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, explained the certification process, the coursework required, the inspections and regulations. It's a lot of work, Gordon admitted, but if you're serious about continuing this, it's the right way to do it. Iris operated legally, with proper permits. That's part of why her releases were so successful. She did everything by the book. I don't know if I'm qualified, Daniel said. Pauline reached across the table and patted his hand. Nobody starts out qualified, dear. They start out willing. The rest comes with time. Before Daniel left, Pauline pressed a container of leftovers into his hands and made him promise to visit again soon. Gordon walked him to his truck, moving slowly in the evening chill. There's something I didn't mention at dinner, Gordon said. Iris left a small trust fund for animal care. Nothing huge, but enough to cover food, medical supplies, emergency vet visits. Her lawyer has been managing it, waiting for someone to take over the work. Daniel stared at him. I couldn't. It's not for you. It's for the animals. Iris set it up specifically for whoever continued her rehabilitation work. I'll give you the lawyer's contact information. At least talk to him. The drive home took Daniel through dark country roads, his headlights cutting tunnels through the forest. He thought about Iris's planning, her faith that someone would come, her careful preparation for a future she'd never see. Back home, he checked on Scout and Rusty. Scout had destroyed the cardboard enrichment box, shredding it completely, but she looked satisfied with her destruction. Rusty had finally eaten. The food bowl was empty, the water bowl half gone. Daniel sat on his bucket between the enclosures and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Preston's number. His finger hovered over the call button, then moved to text instead. Hi, Preston. Just wanted to say hello. Hope you're doing well. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came 10 minutes later. Hey, Dad. Doing okay. Work's busy. You good? It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd exchanged in months. Daniel typed, I'm good. Taking care of some animals. Long story. Maybe I can tell you about it sometime. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Sure, that sounds different for you. Daniel smiled at the screen. It is different. In a good way. Cool. Talk soon. It was a small exchange, barely a conversation, but it felt like a beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel fell into a routine. Morning feeding, health checks, enclosure cleaning, afternoons spent studying Iris's notebooks and the wildlife rehabilitation books Gordon had given him. Evenings observing the animals, documenting their behaviors, tracking their progress. Scout grew more confident daily. She'd started making hunting attempts at the enrichment toys Daniel created, pouncing with increasing accuracy. Her weight was up, her coat glossier. She chirped at him now when he approached. A sound he'd learned meant she was comfortable. Rusty remained fearful, but showed subtle progress. He no longer pressed himself into the corner when Daniel entered. He ate regularly, drank plenty of water, and sometimes, when he thought Daniel wasn't watching, he explored his enclosure, sniffing, marking, exhibiting normal fox behaviors. Daniel started the online coursework for wildlife rehabilitation certification. The material was dense: anatomy, physiology, disease management, behavioral ecology, but he worked through it methodically, the same way he'd once processed insurance claims. Information organized, memorized, applied. Gordon visited twice a week, always bringing something useful: specialized equipment, veterinary contacts, advice on handling specific situations. Pauline came once, bringing homemade soup and spending an hour talking to Scout through the enclosure wire. "She's beautiful," Pauline said. "Iris would be so proud of how she's turned out." One evening, as Daniel was closing his wildlife rehabilitation textbook, his phone rang. Chloe. "Hi, Dad. I've got my travel dates. I'll be there the weekend of the 15th. Is that still okay?" "Of course. I'm looking forward to it." A pause. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the animals. I'd like to see what you're doing." Daniel felt something warm expand in his chest. "I'd like that too." After they hung up, he walked to the workshop one more time. Scout was sleeping, curled in her shelter. Rusty was awake, his eyes reflecting the moonlight through the window. "We've got company coming," Daniel told them. "Time to show what we've been building here." The week before Chloe's visit, Daniel received his first real test. He found Rusty lying on his side in the enclosure, breathing rapidly, his body trembling. Panic shot through Daniel's chest as he grabbed his phone and called Gordon. "Don't touch him yet," Gordon said calmly. "Describe exactly what you're seeing." Daniel forced himself to observe carefully. He's on his side, breathing fast, trembling. His eyes are open, but he's not responding to my voice. "Any discharge from his nose or eyes? Any vomiting?" "No, nothing like that. Could be stress, could be illness. Call Dr. Brennan. I'll text you her number. She's the wildlife vet Iris used. Tell her I sent you." Dr. Brennan answered on the second ring. After Daniel described Rusty's symptoms, she asked about his eating habits, water intake, and recent behavior changes. "Bring him in," she said. "I can see him in an hour." Getting Rusty into the transport carrier was terrifying. The fox was too weak to fight much, which worried Daniel more than resistance would have. He drove faster than he should have, checking the carrier in his passenger seat every few seconds. Dr. Brennan's clinic was a converted barn on a rural property, the waiting room filled with the sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. She took Rusty immediately, her experienced hands gentle as she examined him. "Severe stress response," she concluded after 20 minutes. "His system's been running on adrenaline for months. Since before you got him, I'd guess. Now that he's in a safe environment, his body's crashing. It's actually a good sign in a way. Means he's finally relaxing enough to let down his guard." She administered fluids and a mild sedative, then showed Daniel how to continue supportive care at home. "He needs time and stability," she said. "What you're doing is right. Just keep doing it." The visit cost $300. Daniel paid without hesitation, remembering what Gordon had said about Iris's trust fund. He'd called the lawyer the day before, but hadn't yet met with him. Rusty slept for 12 hours after they got home. Daniel checked on him every hour, barely sleeping himself. By morning, the fox was awake and alert, drinking water on his own. Gordon arrived, mid-morning, and nodded approvingly. "You did good. Iris lost animals because she didn't act fast enough, back when she was learning. You trusted your instincts." "I was terrified," Daniel admitted. "That's how you know you care." Chloe arrived on Friday afternoon, driving a silver sedan that looked too clean for the dirt road leading to Daniel's property. She climbed out slowly, taking in the house, the overgrown garden, the workshop with its new chain-link enclosures visible through the open door. "Dad," she said, hugging him briefly. "The place looks different." "I've been busy." She followed him to the workshop, her expression cautious. When she saw Scout, something in her face changed. Surprise, then reluctant interest. "That's a bobcat," she said. "Her name is Scout. She's about 6 months old now." Scout watched Chloe with alert curiosity, head tilted. Chloe moved closer to the enclosure, her professional demeanor. She worked in marketing, always composed, cracking slightly. "She's beautiful." "And that's Rusty," Daniel said, gesturing to the fox's enclosure. "He's recovering from a stress episode. Had to take him to the vet earlier this week." Chloe turned to look at him. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Really?" Daniel had prepared for this question, but now that she'd asked it, the prepared answer seemed insufficient. "I'm continuing someone's work. A woman named Iris Whitmore. She spent 20 years rehabilitating wildlife, and she left these animals behind when she died. Someone needed to help them." "But why you?" "Because I found them. Because I was the one who was supposed to." Chloe shook her head slowly. "You sound different. You look different too. When did you start caring about wildlife?" "When I realized I'd stopped caring about much of anything else." The words hung between them. Chloe's expression shifted from skepticism to something softer. Concern, maybe, or understanding. "You've been lonely," she said quietly. "Yes. I should have called more." "You have your own life, Chloe. I don't blame you for that." They spent the afternoon together, Daniel showing her Iris's notebooks, the release map, explaining the rehabilitation process. Chloe asked questions, some skeptical, others genuinely curious. She was particularly interested in the documentation aspect, the tracking system Iris had developed. "This is actually sophisticated data collection," she said, studying the map. "You could probably publish research based on this information." "I hadn't thought about that." "You should. It validates the work, shows it's not just—" She paused. "Not just a lonely man's project?" Daniel finished. Chloe looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean it that way." "It's all right. That's what it looks like from the outside. Maybe that's even what it is. But it's also more than that." For dinner, they ordered pizza and ate on the porch while the sun set. Chloe talked about her job, her apartment in Seattle, her boyfriend, whom Daniel had never met. The conversation was easier than it had been in years, not because anything had fundamentally changed, but because they were both trying. "Preston asked me about you," Chloe said as she was leaving. "About what you're doing. I think he's curious. He's welcome to visit. I'll tell him." She hugged Daniel again, longer this time. "Take care of yourself, Dad, and those animals." "I will." After she left, Daniel sat in the workshop, watching Scout groom herself and Rusty sleep peacefully. His phone buzzed, a text from Chloe. "Thanks for today. I'm proud of you." 4 simple words, but they settled something in Daniel's chest that had been unsettled for 3 years. The next morning, Daniel drove to meet with Mr. Grayson, Iris's lawyer. The office was in downtown Maplewood, tucked above a bookstore. Grayson was older than Daniel expected, late 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Iris spoke about this possibility, Grayson said, pulling out a file. She hoped someone would continue her work. The trust contains $18,000 invested conservatively. It generates about $600 annually in interest, plus the principal is available for major expenses, emergency veterinary care, facility improvements, that sort of thing. Daniel stared at the number. She saved this much? Over 20 years, yes. Every donation she received, every small grant, she put into this fund. It was her insurance policy for the animals. Grayson slid papers across the desk. If you're willing to take this on officially, the money is available to you. But there are conditions. You must maintain proper licensing, keep detailed records, allow annual audits to ensure the funds are used appropriately. I understand. There's one more thing. Grayson opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Iris left this, to be given to whoever took over her work. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single page in Iris's handwriting. To the one who came. Thank you for seeing what I saw. That every life matters, that care continues even after we're gone. You were chosen not by accident, but by your own good heart. Trust yourself. The animals already do. Iris. Daniel read it twice, then carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. I'll do right by her, he said. Grayson smiled. I believe you will. Daniel spent the next 3 weeks in what felt like a state of grace. Scout was thriving. Her hunting practice had evolved into genuine skill, pouncing on enrichment toys with deadly accuracy. Rusty had begun eating from Daniel's hand, a breakthrough that made Gordon whoop with delight when he witnessed it. The rehabilitation coursework was progressing, and Daniel had passed 2 major exams. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late November, everything changed. Daniel was reading through Iris's notebook again. He'd read it cover to cover a dozen times by now, but kept finding new details he'd missed. This time, he was looking at the binding itself, noticing how the leather cover was slightly thicker along the spine than it should be. He ran his finger along the edge and felt something, a slight separation in the material. Carefully, he worked his fingernail into the gap. The leather gave way, revealing a hidden pocket stitched into the spine itself. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in Iris's handwriting, to the one who finds this. Daniel's heart hammered as he opened it. The letter inside was dated October 1st, 2024, just days before Iris's final notebook entry. He began to read. To the one who came. If you're reading this, then everything worked as I hoped. Scout found someone. You found Scout, and now you're here, holding my life's work in your hands. I need you to know, nothing about this was accidental. 2 weeks ago, Dr. Brennan told me I had days, maybe a week at most. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. I'd known for months, but kept working because the work was all I had left. But when time became measured in hours instead of months, I had to make a choice. I couldn't bear the thought of my animals dying alone or being processed through a system that wouldn't understand them as individuals. Scout and Rusty weren't just cases to me. They were souls I'd made promises to. I promised Scout's mother, dying on that roadside, that I'd raise her baby. I promised Rusty, terrified and starving, that he'd be safe. But I also couldn't bear choosing someone randomly, couldn't just call a rehabilitator from a directory and hand them over. This work requires more than skill. It requires heart. It requires someone who needs the animals as much as they need care. So I prepared the white bag, put the notebook inside with Scout's collar and a feeding syringe. Things that would make sense to someone who cared enough to wonder. I'd been training Scout since September to carry that bag, to become comfortable with it. Bobcats are remarkably intelligent. She learned to pick it up, to carry it. I left the enclosure door open just enough, placed the bag where she'd find it. And I trusted. Trusted that if she survived, her curiosity would lead her to investigate the bag. Trusted that she'd carry it somewhere visible, somewhere a human might see. Trusted that the right person would stop, would look, would care enough to follow where it led. Daniel stopped reading, his breath caught in his throat. Every detail had been orchestrated. The discovery on the roadside wasn't chance. It was Iris's final act of faith. He continued reading. I chose to believe that the person who stopped would be someone who needed purpose. Someone who'd lost their way and was looking for a reason to find it again. Someone like I was after Jack died. The animals saved me then. I'm hoping they'll save you now. Gordon knows about this letter's existence, but I made him swear not to tell you until you found it yourself. I needed you to choose this work freely, without obligation, to come to it on your own terms. By now you've met Gordon. You've probably met Pauline. You've seen my maps, my records, the scope of what I built, and you're probably wondering if you're capable of continuing it. You are. Not because you have training. Training comes with time, but because you stopped on that road, because you opened that bag, because you read my notebook and decided these animals mattered. That's the only qualification that matters. There's a trust fund for animal care. Gordon has details. Use it wisely. There are protocols in my filing cabinet at the house. Gordon can show you. There's a community of rehabilitators in this region who'll support you if you reach out. But more than any of that, there's you. Your willingness, your compassion, your choice to show up for creatures who can't ask for help themselves. Scout's mother might have been one of mine. I released a female bobcat in that area 15 years ago. If Scout is her descendant, then you're caring for the grandchild of an animal I saved. That's how this work ripples forward. Generation after generation, each life touching the next. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. And when the time comes, when Scout and Rusty are wild again, don't be sad. Be proud. Because releasing them isn't losing them. It's fulfilling the promise we made when we first took them in. Thank you for being the one who came. Thank you for seeing what I saw, that every life has value, that care continues beyond death, that love is the act of preparing something beautiful to exist without us. You were meant for this work. I knew someone would be. With gratitude and faith. Iris Whitmore. P.S. Add your own carving to the walking stick when you're ready. That's how we mark the passing of this work from one hand to another. Gordon will show you how. Daniel sat motionless, the letter trembling in his hands. Everything reframed itself in an instant. Scout finding him wasn't luck. Iris had trained her, prepared her, released her with a message tied to her survival. The notebook wasn't just records. It was an invitation, a test, a carefully constructed bridge between one person's ending and another's beginning. Iris Whitmore had reached across death itself to choose him. Not randomly, deliberately. She'd seen into the future and believed someone worthy would come, and somehow, impossibly, she'd been right. Daniel read the letter again, then a third time. Each reading revealed new layers, the depth of Iris's planning, her understanding of human nature, her absolute faith that compassion would win out over indifference. She'd known someone would stop for Scout, known they'd investigate the bag, known they'd care enough to follow through, and she'd been willing to stake everything on that belief. Daniel thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, hollow, disconnected, sleepwalking, through days that meant nothing. He thought about Margaret's words at their divorce. "You've disappeared into yourself." He thought about his children's polite distance, the way they'd learned not to expect much from him because he'd given them so little. Then he thought about who he was now. Someone who woke with purpose. Someone who'd rushed Rusty to the vet at midnight without hesitation. Someone his daughter said she was proud of. Iris had seen that person inside him before Daniel knew he existed. He stood and walked to the workshop. Scout chirped at his approach, that greeting that meant recognition, trust. Rusty watched from his shelter but didn't retreat. "She knew," Daniel said to them. "She knew exactly what she was doing." Scout tilted her head, those golden eyes bright with intelligence. Daniel pulled out his phone and called Gordon. "I found it," he said, when Gordon answered. "The letter in the spine." A long pause. Then Gordon's voice, thick with emotion. "She made me promise not to tell you. Said you had to discover it yourself. Everything was planned. All of it." Yes, that was Iris. She believed in signs, in fate, in people finding each other when they needed to. She believed in you before you ever existed to her. Daniel looked at Scout and Rusty. "I won't let her down." "Son, you already haven't." The letter changed everything and nothing. The work remained the same: feeding schedules, health checks, enclosure maintenance. But Daniel approached it now with a deeper understanding of what it meant. Every action was part of a covenant that stretched back through Iris to all the animals she'd helped, and forward to whatever Scout and Rusty would become. December arrived cold and clear. Gordon declared Scout ready to begin soft release preparation. "She's 6.5 months old," he explained, consulting Iris's detailed charts. "In the wild, young bobcats start separating from their mothers around this age. She's showing all the right behaviors: hunting instinct, territorial awareness, wariness of humans." That last point stung a bit. Scout had grown less interested in Daniel's presence over the past weeks, more focused on the world beyond her enclosure. It was exactly what should happen, but it still felt like a small rejection. "It means you did it right," Gordon said gently. "She's wild, that's the goal." The soft release protocol was outlined in Iris's notes with typical precision. Gradually expand Scout's access to the property. Reduce feeding frequency to encourage hunting. Eventually open the enclosure completely, allowing her to leave and return at will. Some animals returned for weeks. Others left immediately and never came back. "We can't predict which she'll be," Gordon said. "We just have to let her choose." Daniel spent a week preparing. He installed a one-way door on Scout's enclosure. She could exit freely, but had to learn to use a specific entrance to return. He scattered less food, encouraging her to hunt the abundant mice and voles on the property. He watched as she grew more confident, more powerful, more herself. Rusty watched these preparations with what looked like anxiety. The fox had bonded with Scout in some unspoken way. They couldn't interact directly through their separate enclosures, but they were aware of each other. When Scout paced, Rusty paced. When she was calm, he settled. "They've been companions in their own way," Gordon observed. "He's going to miss her." On a Wednesday morning, Daniel opened the outer door of Scout's enclosure for the first time. The door swung wide, revealing the forest beyond. Scout approached cautiously, sniffing the opening, one paw extended tentatively past the threshold. Then she stepped through. For a moment, she stood just outside her enclosure, looking back at Daniel. Their eyes met, a long, measuring look that felt like both gratitude and goodbye. Then Scout turned and melted into the underbrush with liquid grace, disappearing so completely it was as if she'd never been there at all. Daniel's chest ached. "First time is always hard," Gordon said. He'd come for the release, along with Pauline, who stood with her hand over her heart. "She'll be back," Pauline said. "Maybe not today, but soon. They usually come back at first." They waited 2 hours. Scout didn't return. Daniel forced himself to go about his day, feeding Rusty, cleaning enclosures, answering emails from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Board about his license application. But every few minutes, he checked the workshop, hoping to see Scout's spotted form in the enclosure. Evening came with no sign of her. Daniel barely slept that night, getting up repeatedly to check if she'd returned. The enclosure remained empty. Thursday morning, still no Scout. Daniel tried to focus on Rusty, whose recovery had progressed remarkably. The fox now came to the front of his enclosure when Daniel approached, even took treats from his hand without hesitation. But Rusty kept looking toward Scout's empty space, whining softly. "I know," Daniel told him. "I miss her too." Thursday afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A silver sedan pulled up, and Chloe emerged, followed by a man Daniel had never met. Tall, bearded, wearing the cautious expression of someone entering unfamiliar territory. "Dad," Chloe called. "Preston wanted to come see what you've been doing." Daniel's son. 28 years old, working in software development in Portland, and this was the first time he'd visited the property since the divorce. They'd barely spoken in 2 years beyond brief, awkward phone calls. "Preston," Daniel said, extending his hand. Preston shook it, the gesture formal. "Chloe's been talking about the animals," Preston said. "Thought I'd check it out." They walked to the workshop together. Daniel showed them Rusty first, explaining the fox's journey from terrified isolation to gradual trust. Preston listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking technical questions about rehabilitation protocols and success rates. "And the Bobcat?" Preston asked. "Scout. I released her yesterday. She hasn't come back yet." Chloe touched his arm. "Are you worried?" "I'm hopeful. There's a difference." He showed them Iris's notebooks, the release map, the careful documentation of 20 years of work. Preston studied the map with the analytical eye he applied to everything. "This is actually impressive data collection," he said. "You could create a digital database, track patterns algorithmically, maybe even contribute to wildlife management policy." It was exactly what Chloe had suggested weeks ago. Daniel looked at his children, both of them here, both engaging with his work, both treating him like someone worthy of their attention. "Maybe I could," he said, "if you'd help." Preston looked surprised. "You want my help?" "You're good with systems and data. I'm good with following protocols. Together we might build something meaningful." Something shifted in Preston's expression, the careful distance falling away for just a moment. Yeah, I could do that." They spent the afternoon together, the 3 of them. Daniel made sandwiches, nothing fancy, but shared meals mattered more than he'd understood before. They talked about the trust fund, about expansion possibilities, about whether Daniel might eventually take on more animals. "The license approval should come through in a few weeks," Daniel explained. "After that, I'll be officially certified. Wildlife Services can refer animals to me. It could become a real operation." "You sound excited," Chloe observed. "I am. For the first time in years, I'm excited about what comes next." As they were leaving, Preston paused by his car. "I'm sorry I've been distant, Dad. After the divorce, I didn't know how to talk to you. You seemed so shut down." "I was shut down, but I'm not anymore." Preston nodded slowly. "I can see that. It's good. You seem more like yourself, or maybe more like who you were supposed to be." After they left, Daniel sat on his porch as twilight gathered. The forest had gone quiet, that particular stillness that came with winter cold. He was about to go inside when he saw her. Scout at the edge of the tree line, not approaching, but watching. She was there for perhaps 30 seconds, golden eyes catching the last light, before she turned and vanished back into the forest. She'd come back. Just to check, just to remind him she was still here, still safe, still choosing this place as part of her territory. Daniel smiled. "Good hunting, Scout." Inside, he pulled out the walking stick from where it leaned beside the fireplace. He retrieved his father's carving tools from the workshop. Tools he hadn't touched in 20 years. The wood felt right in his hands as he began to work, slowly shaping Scout's image into the staff. The carving took hours, but he didn't rush. Each detail mattered. The tufted ears, the spotted coat, the alert expression. When he finished, he carved the date and location below the image, just as Iris had done with all her releases. The walking stick now carried one more story, one more life successfully returned to the wild, one more piece of a legacy that would continue long after any of them were gone. Rusty watched from his enclosure as Daniel worked, and for the first time since arriving, the fox's eyes held something other than fear. They held trust. The envelope arrived on a cold Monday morning in early January, official-looking with the State Wildlife Department logo in the corner. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Wildlife Rehabilitation License. Approved. His name was printed in bold letters. Daniel Moss, Licensed Wildlife Rehabilitator, State of Oregon. The certificate listed his property address, his certification number, the species he was authorized to care for. It was real, official. He was no longer just someone helping 2 animals. He was part of a formal network of wildlife care. Daniel called Gordon immediately. It came through, the license. Gordon's whoop of celebration was loud enough that Daniel had to pull the phone from his ear. "Congratulations. Pauline, he got it." A pause. Then Gordon was back. "We're coming over tonight. This calls for a proper celebration." The afternoon brought something else, unexpected. A call from Officer Phyllis Crane with the County Wildlife Services. "Mr. Moss, heard through the grapevine that your license came through. Congratulations." "Thank you. I've got a situation I'm hoping you can help with. Hikers found an injured great horned owl up near Cascade Falls. Wing damage, possibly a collision with a vehicle. We'd normally transport it to the facility in Eugene, but that's a 2-hour drive. You're only 40 minutes from the site. Would you be willing to take the bird?" Daniel's first instinct was doubt. Was he ready for this? But then he thought of Iris's letter. "You were meant for this work." "Yes," he said. "I can take the bird." "Excellent. Meet me at the Cascade Falls trailhead in an hour." Daniel gathered supplies with methodical focus: transport carrier, towels, gloves, the emergency kit Dr. Brennan had helped him assemble. He checked on Rusty before leaving. The fox was resting comfortably, his recovery nearly complete. Gordon had suggested they begin soft release preparation for Rusty in a few weeks, once the worst of winter had passed. "I'll be back soon," Daniel told him. "We're getting a new resident." The drive to Cascade Falls took him deep into the mountains, winding roads that climbed through dense forest. Officer Crane was waiting with her patrol vehicle, along with 2 concerned hikers, a couple in their 60s wearing expensive hiking gear. "Thank God you're here," the woman said. "We didn't know what to do. The poor thing is just lying there." The owl was 20 yards off the trail, partially hidden under a fir tree. Even injured, it was magnificent, easily 2 feet tall, with those distinctive ear tufts and fierce yellow eyes that tracked their approach. Great horned owl, probably 2 years old, Officer Crane said quietly. Left wing's definitely damaged. See how he's holding it? Daniel saw. The wing drooped at an unnatural angle, but the owl was alert, aware, fighting. He wants to live, Daniel said. That's half the battle. Working together, using techniques Gordon had taught him, they got the owl into the carrier. The bird fought weakly, but his injury limited his movement. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he secured the carrier in his truck. First Wildlife Services referral, Officer Crane said. You're officially part of the network now. We'll send you paperwork for our records. The drive home was nerve-wracking, every bump in the road making Daniel wince. But the owl remained quiet, conserving energy. A good sign, according to the information Daniel had studied. At home, he'd already prepared an enclosure using Iris's specifications for raptors. A quiet, dimly lit space separated from the other animals to minimize stress. He transferred the owl carefully, then stepped back to assess. The bird settled in the far corner, eyes never leaving Daniel. Despite the injury, despite the stress, the owl radiated fierce dignity. I'm going to call you Athena, Daniel said softly, Greek goddess of wisdom. Seems appropriate. He called Dr. Brennan, who agreed to come out the next morning for an examination. Then he sat between the 3 enclosures, empty Scout's space, Rusty's, and now Athena's, and felt the full weight of what he'd taken on. 3 animals, 3 different needs, 3 lives depending on his knowledge and care. Gordon and Pauline arrived at 6, carrying what looked like enough food for 10 people. Pauline had made a pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and an apple pie. License Day deserves a proper dinner, she announced, taking over Daniel's kitchen with comfortable authority. They ate at the kitchen table, and Gordon raised his glass of cider in a toast. To Daniel Moss, licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Iris would be so proud. To Iris, Daniel said, and they all drank. After dinner, Pauline insisted on seeing the new arrival. She stood at Athena's enclosure, her expression soft with sympathy. Beautiful bird. Iris loved raptors especially. Said they reminded her that wildness doesn't mean weakness. It means strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Gordon showed Daniel something he'd brought, a wooden sign, hand-carved and beautifully finished. The words read, Whitmore Moss Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Made it myself, Gordon said. Figured it was time to make this official. Both names, like Chloe suggested. Iris's legacy and your future together. Daniel ran his fingers over the carved letters, emotion closing his throat. It's perfect. They mounted it at the entrance to the property, securing it to a post where anyone arriving would see it immediately. The winter sunset cast long shadows as they worked, the 3 of them, and Daniel felt something he hadn't felt since before the divorce. He felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, after Gordon and Pauline left, Daniel made his rounds. Rusty was sleeping peacefully. Athena sat alert but calm, beginning the long process of adjusting to captivity. And through the workshop window, Daniel saw a familiar shape at the tree line. Scout, keeping watch. She'd been visiting every few nights, staying just long enough to reassure herself, or perhaps reassure Daniel, that she was all right. She was fully wild now, hunting successfully, claiming territory. But some part of her still considered this place home, or at least safe ground. Daniel raised his hand in acknowledgement. Scout's ears twitched, and then she was gone. Inside, Daniel opened his rehabilitation journal. It had grown thick with entries over the past months. He wrote about Athena's arrival, about the license approval, about the sign now marking his property as an official rehabilitation center. Then he added something more personal. Iris believed someone would come. She believed they would care. She believed this work would continue beyond her. Tonight, hanging that sign with Gordon, I understood what she meant. This isn't about one person or even one lifetime. It's about keeping a promise. To the animals, to the land, to the future. I'm not replacing Iris. I'm standing where she stood, doing what she did, so that one day someone else can stand here too. The work continues. The promise holds. The circle goes on. He closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside Iris's notebook. 2 records of the same calling, separated by time, but united in purpose. Through the window, the forest stood dark and alive with possibility. Daniel went to bed feeling something he'd almost forgotten existed. He felt necessary. Dr. Brennan arrived early the next morning, her veterinary bag slung over one shoulder. She examined Athena with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle but firm as she assessed the wing damage. "Fracture here," she said, indicating a spot on the wing. "Clean break, which is good. With proper splinting and rest, she should heal completely. 8 to 10 weeks, then we'll reassess flight capability." Daniel watched as she demonstrated the splinting technique, explaining each step. "You'll need to check this daily. Make sure she's not disturbing it. Raptors are stubborn. They'll try to use an injured wing before it's ready." The work was delicate, requiring patience and confidence Daniel wasn't sure he possessed. But he followed Dr. Brennan's instructions carefully, and together they immobilized Athena's wing. "You did well," Dr. Brennan said as they finished. "Iris trained me, you know. 20 years ago, when I was fresh out of veterinary school. She taught me everything about wildlife medicine that the textbooks left out. What was she like when you first met her?" Dr. Brennan smiled. "Fierce, uncompromising about animal welfare, but also kind. She never made you feel stupid for asking questions. She'd say, 'The only bad question is the one you don't ask when an animal's life depends on the answer.'" After Dr. Brennan left, Daniel spent the morning researching raptor rehabilitation. The information was overwhelming. Flight conditioning protocols, hunting skill assessment, release site selection. Each species required different approaches, different timelines. He was deep in reading when his phone rang. "Preston." "Hey, Dad, I've been working on something. Can I come by this weekend? I want to show you." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Yeah, actually, everything's good. See you Saturday." The week passed in careful routine. Athena accepted food reluctantly at first, then with growing appetite, a positive sign. Rusty continued his steady progress, now comfortable enough to play with enrichment toys Daniel created, and Scout appeared twice more at dusk, silent sentinels at the forest edge. Saturday brought Preston and his girlfriend, Anne, a quiet woman with intelligent eyes and a warm handshake. Preston carried a laptop and an air of barely contained excitement. "I built something," he said, opening the computer on Daniel's kitchen table. "A database for your rehabilitation records." The screen showed a clean, professional interface, tabs for individual animals, medical records, feeding schedules, release tracking, a mapping function that could plot release locations and track patterns over time. "I digitized all of Iris's records from her notebooks," Preston explained. "Every animal, every release, going back 20 years. Then I added your recent entries, Scout, Rusty, Athena. The system can generate reports, identify trends, even predict optimal release locations based on historical success rates." Daniel stared at the screen, overwhelmed. "You did all this?" "Took me about 40 hours, but yeah. I thought it might be useful. And I was thinking, if you're serious about expanding this operation, you'll need better systems. This could help. Anne leaned forward. I work in grant writing. Preston showed me what you're doing here, and I think you might qualify for several wildlife conservation grants. With proper documentation and this database, you could apply for funding to expand your facilities. I don't know what to say, Daniel managed. Preston looked almost embarrassed. You don't have to say anything. I wanted to help. You're building something real here, Dad. Something that matters. They spent the afternoon together, Preston teaching Daniel how to use the database system, Anne explaining grant application processes. At one point, Daniel looked up to find both his children present. Chloe had arrived mid-afternoon, bringing groceries to make dinner. His family, gathered in his home, working together on something meaningful. When had that last happened? Preston asked to see the animals. Daniel led them to the workshop, explaining each resident's story. Preston was particularly fascinated by Athena, asking detailed questions about healing timelines and flight mechanics. She's incredible, Anne said softly, watching the owl. The way she looks at you, like she's measuring your worth. Raptors do that, Daniel said. They're discerning creatures. Rusty approached the front of his enclosure when Chloe knelt down, something he'd never done with strangers before. He trusts you, Chloe said to Daniel. They all do. That evening, after Preston and Anne left, Chloe stayed to help clean up. They worked in comfortable silence until she spoke. You're different, Dad. Not just happy. You're present. Does that make sense? It does. I was so angry when you and Mum split. I blamed both of you, but especially you for just disappearing into yourself. I didn't understand that you were grieving too. Daniel paused in drying a dish. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you and Preston the way I should have been. You're here now. That's what matters. She touched his arm. Keep doing this. Whatever this is, keep doing it. After she left, Daniel sat in the workshop between the enclosures. Athena was resting, her wing healing. Rusty was curled in his shelter, content. And somewhere out in the forest, Scout was living the wild life she was meant for. Gordon had said it was almost time to begin Rusty's soft release. The fox was healthy, displaying normal behaviors, ready for the next phase. In a few weeks they'd start the process, gradually expanding his access, reducing feeding, encouraging independence. Eventually, Rusty would leave, just like Scout had. And that was exactly as it should be. Daniel pulled out his carving tools and the walking stick. Scout's image was there, proud and perfect. Now he began carving Rusty's form below it, the distinctive red coat, the white-tipped tail, the alert expression. The work was meditative, each careful cut revealing the fox's shape from the wood. Hours passed without notice. When he finally finished, he sat back and examined his work. 2 animals now. 2 successful rehabilitations, or at least one complete and one nearly so. 2 lives given back to the wild. He thought of Iris's letter. Releasing them isn't losing them. It's fulfilling the promise we made when we first took them in. The workshop door creaked. Daniel looked up to see Scout at the threshold, closer than she'd come since her release. She stood completely still, watching him with those golden eyes. They regarded each other in silence. Then Scout made that small chirping sound, the greeting she'd used when she was young, when she'd still needed him. "Hello, Scout," Daniel said softly. "I'm glad you're well." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the night. But she'd come close. She'd acknowledged him. And somehow that felt like a gift, not of dependence, but of recognition. She remembered him, even as she chose her wild life. Daniel stood and walked to the workshop door, looking out at the forest. The cold air carried the scent of pine and snow. Somewhere out there, Scout was hunting. Somewhere further, a whole ecosystem was alive and functioning, each creature playing its part. And here, on this small property, Daniel was playing his part too, preparing animals to rejoin that ancient dance, then letting them go. He touched the walking stick, feeling Scout's and Rusty's carved forms beneath his fingers. This was the work. This was the promise. This was home. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, with cold rains that lasted for days before finally giving way to tentative sunshine. Daniel stood at his workshop window, watching the forest come alive with new growth, ferns unfurling, wildflowers pushing through last year's leaf litter, the whole world renewing itself. 6 months had passed since he'd found Scout on that roadside. 6 months that had transformed everything. Athena's wing had healed perfectly. Dr. Brennan had removed the splint 2 weeks ago, and the owl was now in flight conditioning, practicing in a large outdoor enclosure Daniel had built with Gordon's help. Her flight was strong, her hunting instinct sharp. Another month, maybe 2, and she'd be ready for release. Rusty's soft release had begun in late February. Daniel had opened his enclosure door the same way he'd opened Scout's, and the fox had ventured out cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. For 3 weeks, Rusty had returned every evening for food. Then every other evening. Then once a week. Now it had been 12 days since Daniel had last seen him. "He's gone wild," Gordon had said when he visited last. "That's success, Daniel. That's what we work for." Daniel knew it was true, but the empty enclosure still made his chest ache. He missed Rusty's bright eyes watching him, the fox's gradual transformation from terrified creature to trusting companion. But that was the point, wasn't it? To love something enough to prepare it for a life without you. The rehabilitation center had grown beyond anything Daniel had imagined. 3 new animals currently in care, a young raccoon with a healed leg injury, an injured red-tailed hawk, and a baby opossum found orphaned in someone's garage. Officer Crane called regularly with referrals. Word had spread through the Wildlife Services network that there was a reliable rehabilitator in the region, someone who followed protocols and got results. Preston's database tracked everything meticulously. Anne had helped Daniel apply for 2 grants, and they'd received approval for 1, enough to build 2 additional enclosures and expand the flight conditioning space. The property was slowly transforming into a proper rehabilitation facility. Gordon visited twice a week still, bringing wisdom and stories about Iris. Pauline came too, often bringing food and warmth. They'd become family in a way Daniel's actual family had struggled to be for years. But his relationship with Chloe and Preston had transformed as well. Chloe called every Sunday now, real conversations that went beyond pleasantries. She'd started researching wildlife veterinary programs, thinking about a career change. Preston visited monthly, bringing improvements to the database, teaching Daniel new features, staying for dinner and conversation. This morning, Daniel had work to do. He'd received a call from a teacher in Maplewood. Could he bring some of the animals to the high school for an educational presentation? Students were studying ecology, and seeing rehabilitation work firsthand would be valuable. Daniel had never done public speaking. The thought terrified him, but Iris's voice echoed in his mind. This work isn't just about individual animals. It's about building understanding, creating care, expanding the circle of people who believe wildlife matters. He'd said yes. Now, preparing for the afternoon presentation, Daniel gathered materials, photos of Scout and Rusty, Iris's release map, his rehabilitation journal. He'd bring Athena, let students see a raptor up close, understand the majesty of these creatures. The high school was larger than he expected, the gymnasium filled with perhaps 200 students. Daniel's hands trembled as he set up, but once he began talking about finding Scout, about Iris's legacy, about what rehabilitation meant, the nervousness faded. The students listened intently. When he brought Athena out, the room went silent. The owl sat calmly on his gloved hand, regarding the audience with those fierce yellow eyes. "This is Athena," Daniel said. "She hit a vehicle 3 months ago. Her wing was broken. In the wild, that would have been a death sentence. But with proper care, she healed. In a few weeks, she'll be released back into the forest where she belongs." A hand raised. A girl, perhaps 16, sitting in the front row. "What happens after you release them? Do you ever see them again?" Daniel thought of Scout appearing at the tree line, of Rusty's final visit before disappearing into the wild. Sometimes. But usually no. And that's all right. The goal isn't for them to remember us. The goal is for them to be so completely wild that they don't need us at all. Another hand. A boy this time. "Why do you do it then? If they just leave?" Daniel paused, considering. Because the work isn't about what we get back. It's about what we give forward. Every animal we help has a chance to live, to breed, to contribute to the ecosystem. That ripples outward in ways we can't predict. Scout might have kits someday. Rusty might father a whole generation of foxes. Athena could live another 20 years, raising dozens of chicks. That's the real success. Not whether they remember us, but whether they thrive without us. After the presentation, several students approached with questions. One boy lingered after the others had left, quiet, serious, with questions that showed he'd been listening carefully. "Could I volunteer?" he asked. "I'd like to learn about this work." Daniel saw something of himself in the boy's expression, a yearning for purpose, for connection to something meaningful. "Yes," Daniel said. "Come by next Saturday. Bring work gloves." Driving home, Daniel felt a sense of completion settling over him. The circle was expanding, a student who wanted to learn, a community beginning to understand the value of wildlife care, a legacy that would continue beyond any single person. Back at the property, he checked on his animals. The raccoon was ready for release next week. The hawk was progressing well. The baby opossum was thriving on formula and would need care for several more months. As evening fell, Daniel walked the property line with the walking stick in his hand. The carvings caught the fading light, Scout and Rusty, rendered in careful detail. He'd need to add Athena soon, when her release was complete. Movement at the forest edge caught his eye. Scout emerged from the shadows, but she wasn't alone. A larger male Bobcat accompanied her, keeping a respectful distance from Daniel, but clearly paired with Scout. And Scout's belly was swollen with pregnancy. Daniel's breath caught. She'd found a mate. She was starting her own family. The legacy Iris had begun, possibly with Scout's grandmother all those years ago, was continuing forward into yet another generation. Scout met Daniel's eyes across the distance. No fear. Just recognition. The acknowledgement that they'd both played their parts, and played them well. Then she turned and melted back into the forest with her mate, leaving Daniel standing in the twilight. He thought of Iris's final words. "Love is the act of preparing something beautiful to exist without us." Scout was beautiful. She was wild. She was free. And she was exactly where she was meant to be. Daniel returned to the house and opened his rehabilitation journal. He wrote about the presentation, about the student who wanted to volunteer, about Scout's pregnancy. Then he added a final thought. Iris wrote that we find each other when we're ready. I wasn't ready when I found Scout. I was lost, disconnected, barely living. But Scout found me anyway, carrying a message from a woman who believed someone would come. Someone who needed the animals as much as they needed care. She was right. The animals saved me. Now it's my turn to save them. Not by holding on, but by letting go. Not by keeping them close, but by preparing them to leave. This is the work. This is the promise. This is love. And it continues. He closed the journal and placed it beside Iris's on the shelf. 2 lives, 2 stories, 1 unbroken thread of care stretching forward into the future. Outside, the forest whispered, with wind and life. Somewhere out there, Scout was hunting for 2. Rusty was claiming territory. Athena would soon soar free. And here, in this place that had once been just a house, where a lonely man waited for nothing, something true had taken root. Purpose, connection, home. Daniel looked at the walking stick leaning beside the door, at the sign mounted at the property entrance, at the enclosures that held animals on their journey back to wildness. This was enough. This was everything. This was exactly where he was meant to be.